Hi, I'm Shane Delia. Welcome to chefmasterclasses.com. We're cooking a lovely dish today, roast duck, walnut quince couscous. Stay tuned and I'll show you how to do it. All right, so for the first part of our dish, we actually have to cook our quinces. Now we're doing a beautiful roast duck. To marry up the duck, we need to get some sweetness out of our quince. Quinces are one of those fruits that you can't eat raw. You need to actually spend some time and marry some flavours up to it. You know, we're using a beautiful apple cider, which is very vibrant, effervescent and lovely sweet flavours. We're going to marry that up with some cinnamon, star anise, sugar and a little bit of black pepper, because you want to get some flavour into the quince that's not just sugar. You know, this is a savoury dish, so you want to be able to impart the flavour into it. With quinces, generally when you're looking for one, you want to find something that's not bruised, that's fairly yellow. If you find a quince that's green, it's not ripe. It's not like a peach where you can squeeze it and it's nice and soft. It's going to always feel a little bit hard. There'll be a little bit of give, but it's generally going to be a hard fruit. You're going to find pieces of imperfection, little bruises, but when you're cooking a piece of quince for 20 to 30 minutes, it's going to discolour anyway, it's going to oxidise. So the colour of the flesh isn't imperative. Make sure you've got a nice sharp knife and a good grip on the quince, because they can be a little bit slippery on the board and they are quite firm inside. So you want to cut straight through the middle, exposing the core. Now the core, just like an apple, is something you don't want to eat, so you want to remove it. So generally what I do is I quarter it up and just take a nice slice out. You can also, if you want to keep that shape, just like an apple, you can slowly cut out the core. So after you finish segmenting your quinces, you want to make sure that they're all similar shapes. They're all going to cook for the same time in the pot. If they're all irregular, you're going to end up some that are hard and some that are soft. So in the pan, you want to put all of your quince, your apple cider. Now with apple ciders, there's different types. You know, there's some apple ciders that are really sweet and some that are a bit dry. The one we're using today is a little bit dry, and because it's a savoury dish, it's probably the right choice. You know, we can manipulate the flavours with the sugar and the spices that we're putting in. But if you start with a sweet product in the beginning, it's going to make it really hard for you as a cook to judge with the flavour you want. Cinnamon quills, sugar, black pepper, and star anise. That just goes on the stove for about 20 to 25 minutes on a low simmer until the quinces are nicely soft. So what we're going to do now is cook the duck. There's always this big myth about cooking duck that it's hard to cook or that it's fatty. Yeah, duck's a little bit fatty, but the flavour you get from duck is amazing. What we've done with the duck is we've just gently scored the skin just to expose the flesh without going through the flesh. What that's going to do, it's going to stop the flesh from shrinking, and it's also going to help that duck render its fat and become crispy. What you want to do is just season the duck, a little bit of salt, a little bit on the flesh, and it's done. What we do is we cook that duck on the flesh side first, so then you can put it in the pan on the fat, so it's got time to render all that excess fat out and it becomes nice and crispy. Okay, the couscous we're going to use for the dish is a Israeli couscous. Now, there's many types of couscous. There's a really small, fine couscous, which everyone's sort of familiar with, which is more your Mediterranean type of couscous. This Israeli couscous is really unique. It's a couscous that's toasted. So it's, first of all, you have to understand what couscous is. Couscous isn't a grain. Everyone thinks it's a grain like flour or barley or even flour or semolina. It's not. It's a product. So it's actually like a pasta base, eggs, water, and flour, which is then formed into the various shapes. Traditional couscous dishes like a tagine, what you'd find in Morocco, which this dish stems from, use a fine grade of couscous. This large grain is first toasted, so it's got a real earthy flavour, very unique. And I think that with a hearty dish like duck and quinces, that little earthiness that this couscous brings, amazing. To cook it, it's really simple. That's the raw couscous, that's the cooked couscous. As you can see, the raw one's really small. When it's cooked, it's almost 3 times the size, but it won't get much bigger than that, and it holds its shape really well. So it can be used in dishes like this where you're pan frying a couscous, or in a soup where you want it to actually float and keep its shape. This would be the couscous that you use. You could use it the same way as you would rice in a traditional sort of like in Malta we do a minestra, which is a base of an Italian dish, minestrone, and we use a lot of rice in it, or a brodo, which is a chicken-based soup, which has got a lemon and chicken livers and rice in there, and it gives it that earthiness and that depth of flavour. You could use couscous in something like that. To cook the couscous, with a large grain like this, you actually need to give it some power. You need to boil it. So what you do is get a pot of water, 3 times the amount of water to couscous, a bit of salt, and boil it until it's nice and soft. Now it might take 10 minutes, it might take 8. It depends on the couscous, depends how dry it is, how old it is, how much it's been toasted originally. Generally a couscous like this, if it's fresh and it's still got plenty of life in its use by date, it'll take about 10 minutes. So now we have to go and check if our quinces are ready. They should be done by now. So they're done now. Really nice and soft. They're not too soft where they're pureed. They've still retained their shape, and they're a little bit firm because we want to be able to caramelize this in a pan. But it's changed its color. It's become really syrupy, and that's what you want. Because when we put that in the pan and caramelize it with the couscous, it's going to become really sticky and give the body of the dish. So one of the other components in the dish are these little cocktail onions. Now, these you can find from any supermarket. They're generally this shape. They're just covered in a light brown casing, like you'd find a normal big brown onion. The difference is with these, they're a lot sweeter. Even though they're sweet, they're still not sweet enough to eat just whole like that. So what I've done with that is I put it in a pot, just enough to cover with the skin on, a little bit of butter and like a teaspoon of sugar just to help bring out the flavour in the onion. We've just boiled that for about, well, actually not boiled, simmered that for about 5 minutes, just until it's soft. Then I've peeled off all the exterior to just reserve the onion as a whole. Because you want to have that in the dish. The rest of it's quite, the quinces, even though they're still a little bit firm, they are quite soft. The couscous has got a bit of a spongy texture. There's nothing really to get in and cut and eat apart from the duck. So you want to have a bit of onion with that. Some of the other components that we're going to use in the dish, which are going to give it its soul, classic things like Aleppo pepper. This is a really important product which I use predominantly in all the food I do. If I ever need heat, that's what I turn to. It's a beautiful Turkish product. It's really unique to a region called Aleppo, which is where the pepper derives from. The peppers are dried out in the sun, and then they're rubbed in their hands with some olive oil just to make them nice and soft. And when you buy it, if it's not moist and it's too dry, well then it's a bit old. It's not too hot, it's a little bit sweet, and that's what you want. You don't want something that's too hot because it just changes the flavour of the dish, and traditional Middle Eastern and Turkish food has that sweetness on the palate. Some of the other components that are going to bring this dish to life are things like cinnamon. Now, cinnamon's used hugely in the Middle East, especially in Morocco, where the sweet and the savoury component of a dish really come into play. Roasted walnuts, which are going to give that texture in the dish, because there's, like I said before, there's nothing with any real bite, so walnuts are going to give us that. Lemon juice, which is going to help cut the sweetness of the quinces, and cut that sweetness that also comes from the onion. And coriander, which I use in a lot of my dishes, which gives it that life and vibrancy, and just roughly chopped at the end, in at the last minute, so it's still got some vibrance. Everyone's always scared about cooking duck. Duck's easy. Okay, so with the duck, you want to make sure you get it on the flesh side down. What that's going to do is going to seal the duck and make sure all the juices stay in the duck and don't end up in your oven. You want to leave it in the pan for about three or so minutes until that duck has become really nice and brown and caramelized around the outside. What that's going to do is going to give the duck some texture. So when you slice into the duck, you've got that soft, meaty inside, crispy skin on the outside, and nice caramelized flesh on the bottom. You need to cook it for 8, rest it for 10. Duck can be served nice and pink. It's easier to cook than chicken. Chicken, you have to make sure it's cooked all the way through. Duck, you can serve a little bit pink. So our 8 minutes are up. Oh. Duck's nice and caramelized, really nice and caramelized on the skin, and it feels tight but not too firm. So there's a bit of push in there, which means the duck's still nice and pink inside. When we rest that duck, we want to make sure we rest it with the skin side up, because if you rest it with the skin side down, what's going to happen is all that juice is going to fall into the skin and it's going to make it soggy. It's time to cook the couscous. Now, we've done all of our prep work, and that's really important to make sure you've got all your components ready, so when it comes time to putting the dish together, it's really easy. First, we have to start off heating the pan. Now, I've got a really lovely non-stick pan. First thing that goes in the pan, our olive oil, our quinces. And what I want to do with the quinces is I want to slightly brown them so they caramelize and really release the sweetness that's been imparted into them from the apple cider. You need to give those quinces some time. If you try to put everything in the pan at the same time, what you're going to do is you're going to lower the temperature in the pan and everything's just going to stew. And that's not what you want to happen at this stage of the dish. Now goes your onions. And some of that butter. The reason we add the butter now is because if you add it at the beginning of the dish, it's just going to burn. Our walnuts. The reason we add the walnuts now is we want to release that natural oil inside the walnut and make sure that all the flavour of the walnut just doesn't stay in the walnut, but it's inside the rest of the dish as well. Our Aleppo pepper, cinnamon, crushed garlic, and you want to give that garlic a little bit of time to cook, so just move it around in the pan, because if you leave it in there raw, it's going to be really strong and overpower all the other flavours. And couscous. Now the whole idea of the couscous is that you move it around, because if you leave it just sit there, it's just going to clump together. And you can see it's taking on the colour of all the flavours that we put into that dish. Our reserve juice from the cooking liquid of the quinces. And our star anise and cinnamon quills. Now the sweetness and the sugar in that cooking liquor is going to slowly caramelise and create a really lovely sticky couscous. A little bit of salt to balance out all the sweetness in there. And some lemon juice just to balance it out even further. Once the cooking liquor in the quinces has started to come down and it's not runny but almost sticky and congealed and bringing the couscous together, you want to add your coriander. Now I'm always against chopping the hell out of a soft herb, especially like coriander, on a chopping board. Because all you end up with, especially when you've got a white chopping board, is a green chopping board. And all that is all the flavour from the coriander ending up in the board, and all you're left with is a carcass of herbs. It's better just to sort of tear the herbs. That way it's slowly releasing the flavour, and you still have something to bite into. And once the herbs are in there, it's done. Now's the fun bit, putting it together. For a dish like this, you don't have to serve plated. You know, you could serve a big bowl of that couscous on the table with a big salad and the duck sliced up, and everybody can help themselves, because some people might like the duck a little bit more than the couscous and vice versa. So, choose your plate. Time to slice your duck. Now, the duck's been resting for about 10 minutes, and what that does is it retains the moisture inside the duck. So when you cut it, it doesn't just all leach out, and it also makes the duck a lot more tender, and it makes it a lot more juicy. So you flip it over on the skin side. You slice the duck any way you see fit. You could cut it into just 3 portions, or I like to slice it on the angle a bit because it helps cut against those fibres and make it a little bit softer to eat. Our quinces and couscous. Now you want to make sure you get a little bit of everything in there. So a piece of onion, piece of couscous, some quinces, your sliced duck. Maybe, just because I'm a chef and I'll be a bit chefy, one of those quinces, those cinnamon quills as a garnish. A little bit of our lovely olive oil over the top. And you've got yourself a lovely little dish.
Hi Stu, how are you?
No, I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
How are you?
Look, I'm great, and I'm so excited about eating Shane's amazing duck dish.
So am I.
But I really would love you to tell me what wine would suit that dish.
My pleasure. The one that I've actually chosen today to go with this wonderful duck dish is, I think, a fantastic example of a very cold climate Central Otago Pinot Noir. It's actually a label called Freeland.
Great label.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A lot of effort went from that from the actual winemakers and the wine growers. This is actually from a wonderful wine grower called James Dicey, and along with his brother and his dad, basically have put Central Otago on the South Island of New Zealand into the spotlight. It is the most southerly region in the world for growing grapes, and it has become, apart from the Northern Hemisphere in places like Burgundy, Pinot Noir is taking to Central Otago region of New Zealand. It's just near Queenstown, so it gets bitterly cold in winter, which is okay because the grapevine goes into dormancy. But it has this wonderful climate which allows, and a wonderful soil structure which allows perfect ripening of the Pinot Noir grape. This was chosen for the roast duck because it has a wonderful savoury quality and a wonderful fruit drive to it from the cherry aromas and the cherry characters that will actually cut through very subtly the slight fattiness of the duck.
Okay.
So shall we have a try?
Love to.
A little bit for me, a lot for you. There we go.
Thank you. It's a very pretty colour, isn't it?
It is a beautifully intense colour. Really quite violet. And touches of wonderful cherry colours there too. But give it a good swirl, get some nice
Smells
air in there.
beautiful.
What are you smelling? Do you smell those wonderful cherry and
Yeah.
slightly lavender qualities as well? Violets?
It's just so aromatic. It's just.
It is.
It's actually a bit spicy as well, a little bit.
There is a spiciness character which comes usually with Pinot Noir in general.
I mean, I'm certainly not an expert, hence why I'm learning from you.
Well, thank you.
What to appreciate.
We're
but
learning off each other.
it's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really nice.
A super premium Central Otago Pinot Noir would normally sell for 35 and upwards. You can get this for around 32.
Wow, it's not bad.
But I have, that's its recommended retail price, but I have seen it below that on special occasionally.
Okay.
But it's an absolute gift if you're wanting to discover what the Central Otago region of the South Island of New Zealand is becoming extraordinarily famous for.
So when I make this dish myself
Yeah.
for my next dinner party,
Yes, Nerida.
I'll Shane, watch out.
And match it with this wonderful freeland Pinot.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll be sounding very, very intelligent and very educated.
There we go. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.